Okay, let's get underway. Thanks very much, everyone. If you want to have a look at the presentation, as always, the bit.ly link is available. I have put it into chat for you so that you can see the presentation as we go. The presentation that I'll actually be doing today, as well as all of the other links. This recording is live, so if you don't wish to participate, you will need to drop out of the session. The recording will go up onto YouTube. I will try and have that up within the week. I always try and sort of make sure I've got it up as soon as I can with all the downloads, uploads, and getting it organised for you. So thanks for joining for our last of the year. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're actually meeting from today, and to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. So welcome one and all. We are, of course, in a session. We are bound by code of conduct. We're working alongside Microsoft. So I ask that you please be open and welcoming of all viewpoints, and that understand that we all do have differences and come from different viewpoints. I ask that you be friendly and patient, and you use appropriate GIFs and images along the way. Please feel free to chat with me at any point. You can raise your hand if you would like to come off mute. So if you do have a question, please feel free to type into chat or raise your hand to come off mute. My name is Kirsty McGrath. I go by she, her, my pronouns, and I am an adoption consultant with On Point Solutions. So I always give a bit of a what have I been up to? Often it's just my cakes, but I've been doing the Christmas rounds of the city. I took my grandson in over the weekend and had a little bit of fun. Everyone knows me or been around me. They know that I'm pretty short. I'm actually at 5 foot, and I've got a grandson. He's 5 and he's up to here, so it won't be too long till he takes over. Always doing my bushwalks and cake decorating, and always enjoy that bit of downtime. So that's what I do in my personal time. Okay, so let's get started into what's new in adoption. The good part about this month, I suppose, there's not as much as what we've had in the past with all the announcements at Ignite. That meant that it was a little easier between Ignite and Inspire and all the others. It's been a little quieter coming into December. Yay. So it didn't mean as much content, so we won't have as many things to get through. You can, of course, as I said, you can go to the Microsoft 365 Adoption on YouTube, and you'll be able to see these videos going live on there at the end of the session, should you wish to see any of the past sessions as well. Collab Talk, we now have, I have 56 Ask Me Anything sessions that Christian actually runs and brings in MVPs across the world. There's anywhere from, 2 to 5 of us joining in our AMA answering questions. So if you've got anything, please feel free to put it forward and we can always answer it for you. The Champs Calls, the recent one has actually gone live. So that wasn't that long ago. Viva Goals was the main topic. They're also starting to do a what's new, a little bit of what's new as part of that to be able to help you keep up to speed. So they are, of course, at early hours of the morning. You can go and watch it afterwards and also download the presentation. There's some good stuff in there, especially around Viva Goals. If you want to get the presentation to be able to utilize to help the organisation, then it's a great presentation to pull down with all the slides in it. You've got your adoption and community newsletter to keep an eye out for. We've talked about there is the Microsoft 365 blog. There hasn't been any content since last month. I will keep an eye out for it, and we'll see how much is going to be there when we come back in February next year. There is the communitydays.org launch that Microsoft have actually put out there. So the community days are the things like Microsoft 365 Saturdays, for example. It's all the community sessions that are running right around the world. If you do run community events, then I highly recommend that you can actually go and you could submit your community event to Microsoft and they will put it up on their site. But if you want to go and have a look, I would highly recommend it. The tech community events, there's always some interesting information that's going up there. The latest one is in regards to accessibility. If you want to have a look through what's the latest content around accessibility features, functionality. Modern Work Superhero. So this is actually a Yammer community that's been created to be able to help help sort of businesses across the space that you could get involved in. There's over sort of 2,000, I should say, people within it. If you can't get into the Yammer community, you can email Marielle and she will actually invite you into the Yammer community. I know I couldn't just click and get in. They say kind of you click and you should be able to get in, but not everyone is able to go into external Yammer communities in your business. They do put their sessions that they run up on YouTube to be able to go and watch later on should you wish to. There's a few new features in terms of the adoption score around the people experience. We have looked into this a little, but the main thing now is about group level aggregates to support you. So what it does is it filters by 5 different Active Directory attributes. So you can actually go filter by company, department, country, state, and city. But of course, they need to be up and running in your directory for you to be able to do that as filtering. So that's that group level aggregates that you can, so you can sort of customize and view your reporting. That will be coming out next year. In Viva Learning, the latest blog that actually went up, it has a great little infographic around the future of employee learning. I will sort of dive into this a little bit more when it comes to the presentation that I'm going to be doing after the What's New. So let's have a look at it. I've kept in here the book of news for you. So if you want to go back and have a view of anything from Microsoft Ignite, it's still here and available for you this month. I did go through all the various components of what was new around so that business end user space. That was last month, if you want to go and have a look and see the presentation from last month. So let's have a look at the what's new in Microsoft 365. So overarching for Microsoft 365, you might want to update your internal documentation in terms of training or any bookmarks that you have across the business, because your office.com is going to be moving over to the Microsoft365.com as part of your sort of new environment. So that's that. We'd often go in and just type Office and we could sort of jump into it. It will be swapping. They do have a redirect on it, but it might be an idea to start making those changes. Microsoft have got a whole heap that's kind of come down the line that sits around designing, and it's kind of sitting in the consumer space a lot at the moment, but they are talking about the business space. So I thought I might just touch on this for you so that you have a little bit of an idea of what's coming. When it comes to Designer, it is, would you say, it's potentially a Canva, really kind of that sort of Canva competitor? It is actually what it is, it's sort of this mock-up wireframe or a prototyping tool. It's free as part of the Office software, and sort of Microsoft's actually aiming sort of having this graphic design app that's looking at the consumer side of first possible, as I said, going over into the enterprise. You can sign up if you wanted to. So it's just in sign up phase at the moment in sort of and they'll invite you in sort of in a preview, not available just yet, but coming soon. So you can have a look. I think it's really, and with the signing up at the moment, it's more for the US, but they'll keep us under advisement in regards to other countries. Another one that's come into play is Microsoft Create. Now, all these sort of designer type components, when you think about it, we've got Create, we've got other information, and Designer, the designer side of things has really come from, if you think about PowerPoint, we've got our AI generated in PowerPoint. When it comes to Designer, it's sort of flowing out into the bigger, wider world, and Create is kind of sitting over the top. So when you have a look at some of the tech that's actually flowing through from this, interestingly, that you can when we go in and we look at Create, you can see that you've got the graphics and social posts with the designer side of things. Then you've got Clipchamp, which is sort of fixing and working with the video and production side of things, and Create that's sort of going over the top of those. So It'll be interesting to see what actually happens across this space with all of these design type functionality coming into play. You know, we had Sway. We haven't seen anything done in Sway and updates, I think, since like 2018. So we're kind of seeing all these components sort of coming together and converging in a new way of being able to build with sort of a designer type app. Okay. So what's new to Teams? The video that's actually in the and the information that's available on some of the latest news and the Champs and Learning session is around this, and it's that sign language view for Microsoft Teams to be able to help and support you when it comes to whether you're dealing with the neurodiverse or so that we can be inclusive, for example. So there's lots of different content coming through in this space. They haven't asked me anything. So a tech community asked me anything session on December 13th. It's 9 a.m. Pacific time. So it will be in the early hours of the morning if you are interested and you wanted to be on it. There will usually be a recording, but there are other recordings available as well. And then that way you have, you know, a consistent way to be able to pin and keep at the forefront up to two sign those that are signers on your screen. Now, in terms of Microsoft Teams, last month I really went through, in the last month or so, all of this content. I'm not going to go through it all again. So on the What's New to Teams blog was all content that we've gone through previously. So if you want to go and have a look and review again, one, you can look at the blog. Two, you can go back to last month's video recording. I won't dive through them all again. The what's coming to OneNote though. So we have OneNote Viewer coming to your Teams mobile app. So on your app, on your phone, you'll be able to, across Android and iOS, be able to start editing content. It will go to the standalone OneNote app, but at least you're going to be able to open and view that information within your Teams mobile phone. So that's coming in the English side, yet to be international and other languages at this point. In terms of the what's new for SharePoint, now some of the content I've brought in, some I haven't. It will just be dependent on whether I've covered it off already previously last month. So what I've focused on though is you've got your SharePoint tenant URL rename. So this is the tenant side of things. We had some real issues in the past where you had a tenant and then you couldn't rename SharePoint URL, so it caused all sorts of issues. So that is actually has got a bit of a change coming to it. So this means the SharePoint domain can be updated to the new domain, and you can kind of choose then what that is and continue with it going forward. However, you must have less than 10,000 total sites, and that's right across OneDrive and SharePoint. So that's both. So that's in a big organization, you might quite easily have over 10,000. So something to take into consideration. Now, in terms of the pit stop, okay, so on this pit stop, it's also talking about the 3 SharePoint site templates. The 3 site templates that have come into play is HR, which we have kind of talked about before. There has been some information there, but the other ones are event and then contracts management, which leads into and is supported for those sort of syntax users. So it's got a whole full contracts management component. So they're the 3 new SharePoint site templates you can just plug into your own environment and then have them up and running quickly and simply, rather than building your own. The OneDrive and SharePoint, they're looking at simplifying the link settings. So you will actually see here, it's now got an explanation of exactly what it's trying to do as a part of your link settings, which we're going to see coming across the whole of 365. It's going to give you some of those tips. It's going to give you definitions of it, hopefully some clearer language around which one to particularly sort of choose, for example. And then that way you'll be able to also get back in and see things like, who are your current collaborators? So we'll have it in there as well. That is coming right now. So you'll start to see these things flowing through. In terms of stream, the searching our video transcript for stream, so this is all sitting on SharePoint. It was difficult in the past. You weren't able to actually do searching. It was sort of that stream only, its own sort of standalone, but not over in the SharePoint. But now you can actually search those transcripts, so you can navigate through and physically click on a portion so it can take you to the respective spot in the video. We saw that previously in stream, but not as part of that sort of rollover once it went into OneDrive and SharePoint. So good to see that come into play, and that will be at the beginning of next year. In Whiteboard, there's a couple of components that have come in. Now, not all of this is actually new, but the blog is talking about all the things that you can do before a meeting to get yourself prepared. There's now more templates available, that video links embedding, and we talked about that as a new feature that was coming out. So we've done that in previous sessions. There is the ability to come in and do all that collaboration, see and click, and we've had that for a little bit. But the timer I particularly like. So there's a timer now that can come up on the screen to tell you how long. And another one that I particularly love is that copy and paste of loop components. So you can copy a loop component in and have that up and running inside your whiteboard. So I do love that, flowing through. You've got your standard review in Teams, but another feature that's now come in. So afterwards, you can come back and actually do commenting in your whiteboard. So that is one that's available. They all look a little like this. So that commenting and participation so that you can work on it. Now that's going to be coming next year. So like that one. There is some text formatting support that's coming into Whiteboard. Now, this will be based on Calibri, by the way. So you can format sort of certain portions of your text in those text boxes and shapes, and your mobile users will be able to view that formatted text, but they're not going to be able to actually format it from their mobile phone. So you will be able to do, moving forward, bold, italics, and underline. You'll also be able to have colors come into play. Polls with images. So this one has been a bit sort of, there's been other ways that we've had images coming in, and that's been more in forms, but not in polls. So it's good to see it flowing through into polls. What you do need to know, though, is it is supported across all the different question types that are available in polls. However, it's only up to a 5 megabyte file, and it needs to be at a 2 to 3 width height. So the image works best in that particular layout, and try to avoid images that are sort of much bigger in sort of the width to the height. So it kind of wants to have the in the landscape rather than, flipping it. Okay. There are thousands of different themes coming. We talked about the sort of back themes that will go based on what you call your form. It will throw up different themes, sort of video themes to go into the background. Some new ones that have just flowed through because, of course, we're now coming into Christmas. So it's all the celebrations and Christmas and Thanksgiving. Not everyone in Australia will do Thanksgiving. However, we do have these features and functionality, and there's a lot more coming. So it will go based on whatever it is you've called it, and it'll start to bring up stuff in AI for you. You've also got, in terms of the image choice in your form. So when you go and bring in that image choice on your desktop or your mobile phone, you do have that 5 megabyte limit again. However, what you can do is it actually searches, and you can bring it up in bulk. You could do 5 images in the batch and then actually add in more if you need to. You could do a drag and drop or a copy and paste. And in that way, your questions can actually be based on more images than anything. You can do a little bit of image customization, not a massive amount. It's kind of crop and focusing in a little bit, but there's limitations on that. But at least it supports being able to have a picture as a choice ultimately. The Planner Task Assignment email notification has had some updates. You might have seen this already flowing through. So the email template has had a bit of a visual update in its design. The email address it's coming from has actually changed to whoever's created that task. It will actually come from them now as that email ID. And you'll see the display name is actually going to be changing from Planner to the task assigner's name as well. So that's just a bit of a change on the email notification. So if you've got it in any training content where you've got a screenshot of what the email looks like, you might want to swap that out. So what's new to Viva? So in terms of the what's new to Viva, there's always a ton of content that comes through in Viva. I try to focus on areas that are going to be able to support you. Kerry, you asked, do I think Sway will be decommissioned? Yes. I mean, it's been there a long time with absolutely no work done to it for, quite some time. So eventually I think yes, but it's still there. It's been a long time with no work on it. You never know. All good. And Melinda, I hope you feel better soon, you poor thing. Hey, now I don't disagree with you, Jacob, in regards to the presenter mode in the whiteboard, but I suppose it's focused on the teams, being in presenter mode. Okay. The what's new? Let's have a look. There is now going to be sort of dynamic subject lines that are coming through in terms of your tasks. So when it comes to the tasks, the people's one-on-one chat content, so if you've promised something, for example, to them, or they've promised it to you, anything that you might do in that task, and as part of the AI, what it's going to do now is it'll flow through from your chat into your task and that email that flows in. That way it can also be actionable, so you can do the done or the reminder, for example, or delete it. So you can do all that now within the briefing email. And if you're a learning customer, so if you actually pay for the licensing and for all the extra around the Viva Learning, or you drop in Viva Learning, you're going to see related learning card tracking as well that will come into that briefing email. So I do like that it's kind of bringing it all together to give you those reminders as you need to. I know that there's been many times it saved my bacon, the Viva Insights emails. Love it. Hey. In terms of Viva Engage Stories is now in public preview. We have discussed this at length in the past. If you want to, and also James had come in and spoke to us about stories and storylines on a previous session. So if you want to know a little bit more, you can go and have a look. I've dropped in the video for you to be able to support you as well in terms of what's actually coming to Viva Engage. The loop component. So it's now available in Word for the web, not on the desktop version. So the Word for the web, it's in targeted release at the moment. So that you can so you can do the paste a loop component into your Word online document, so you can actually start to track and work together. Okay, so that's a great new feature that we love, that we've been waiting for, having it flow into all the various aspects across the 365 suite as that sort of fluent task management or idea generation or listings. There's all sorts of different components and tables and things to be able to work with. So I do like Loop. Now, what's coming into Office? There is actually going to be a new location for your add-ins. So your add-ins at the moment actually sit on the Insert tab, and on that Insert tab you'll see you've got like the hexagon icons on the Insert tab. If you wanted to, so what you can do is you can actually come in and you'll see that it's going to actually move from that location over to the main file menu home tab. So if you back on home, that's where it's going to be moving to instead of the Insert tab. Your email signature, this is actually one I've dropped in, where we have our email signatures, pretty stock standard. However, Microsoft have provided a Word document that's got all templates inside it of different email signatures that kind of help you to be a little bit more creative. You can go and download it and choose one. There's like 2 pages of email signatures in this particular gallery. It's like one of those template type documents. Some nice ones in there. I quite liked them. So if you have a business of your own and you want to create something, it's a good one. The what's new to Excel. Okay. Now, there is so much that's been flowing through in the Excel space. It's been fabulous to see it really sort of ploughing forward the way that it has. We've talked about it sort of each month now. There are a couple that I particularly loved. One, the chart data foils. I'll show you a quick little video in a second. And then data from a picture. This one was one of those moments where I just went, oh, I love it. So if you spend any time in Excel or like I do, these are sorts of components. So the chart foils, they actually come in. I'll let it do its play. So I'm not sure if you know what a chart foil. So the chart foils are kind of, this content up the top here where you have your, where it does the little color kind of brackets around things, you can just drag those around. So that's coming through and being able to support you when it comes to it. Now, the data in a picture means that you can go do a snip of something, you can copy it, go to data and go insert a picture from the file or from the clipboard. So if you've just done a screenshot of a table, you can review it, accept it, and then it will actually just drop it straight into Excel for you. That one was just very cool. I loved that one. So being able to bring data out of a picture. Often in the past, I've used sort of OneNote to grab and do a right click and get text out of a picture. This one is it's rather cool. Okay. So if you want to do that one. So I've started bringing in a few things around the what's retiring. From your Office mobile, the share nearby and the transfer files, both of those are actually retiring. However, some of them are just doing a change in feature. So there are other ways to be able to do it, but the kind of the wording and the way that it was there is going to drop off. Please remember that IE11, in terms of that desktop app, is actually going to be permanently disabled within 2 months. So if you've still got it inside your organization for legacy type content, then, please note that will be gone. Visio services will have a discontinuation that starts in February. So this is the Visio web and file viewer part, as it can be now taking over from that. So this Visio services discontinued, but you can use the Visio web and file viewer. And then you'll be able to drop that also into your SharePoint Online. So this is all about that SharePoint features and functionality when you drop it in as a web part. There's just been a bit of a change in the way that you would bring it into SharePoint. Okay. So that's all of the what's new for now. Just jump out of that. I'll discard any annotations, double check whether there are any questions before we move over and start presenting the session for today. So let's have a look. Come back over into chat. Okay. Any questions on what's new before we get underway? No? Okay. So I've presented this topic once or twice at other user groups, but I haven't actually done it for my own user group. Often on the December session, I like to come in and actually, present to you guys. It's not often I'll come and actually do a topic myself. I usually leave it to my speakers, but every now and again, I'll throw something up that I think that might be of interest for you. And if there is any topic that you at any point would like me to go into, then please feel free to message in our chat or flick me an email or through Twitter or LinkedIn, or you'd like to have some content around this, or you want to speak. Maybe you've actually got a really great case study that you've done within your business. Then please feel free to reach out. I'm always looking for speakers. At the moment, I'm looking at trying to get Viva learning as the topic for February next year, so we can have a really good look into Viva learning. So that's sort of what I would like to have a look at as a focus for the new year, but let's see how we go. So the topic for today's session is very much around sort of learning for the hybrid workplace. What are the things around, how do we do this and what's actually changed when it comes to hybrid learning? And it's a topic, I suppose, that's always fairly close to my heart, because having been a trainer for a very long time now and having that as a bit of a core specialty, it made for some challenges. One, we went into fully virtual, but then we start shifting over into hybrid and doing some hybrid learning. So I want to find out from you, type into chat for me, what is hybrid learning? Type into chat. What do you think hybrid learning actually is? Give you a chance to answer the question. Have a stab at it. Everyone's very quiet. Feel free to, you can also raise your hand. Difficult. Yeah, Matthew, it really is difficult, isn't it? I don't disagree with you there with being a trainer, and as you know, being a trainer as well. No one wants to raise their hand. Give us an idea. Asynchronous and multiple formats. Ah, okay. So we're going to go through some of that to be able to help you. Learning in a platform location agnostic way. Any other thoughts? So blended learning compared to hybrid learning. I'll talk about the differences between the two. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So hybrid learning. When it comes to hybrid learning, it's actually an educational approach where your staff choose between participating online or physically in person. So you've got them both going at the same time in synchronous learning. So done in the here and the now in real time across multiple locations, online, in person. It might be even in person across multiple locations. And at the moment, we're kind of in our hybrid learning because I'll have people in the room and I have people online. So we're in a hybrid learning scenario. And when we're in learning though, we've got it where we've got kind of the webinar, which is just information giving, which is kind of what I just did. But then there's the clicking and the physical doing in hybrid learning, which then gets some different challenges. And what we're actually seeing at the moment is we've stopped doing a lot of different ways of learning. We're kind of focusing more on the asynchronous learning rather than the synchronous learning at the moment. So we often end up with help desks that are getting overrun with end user questions. People haven't actually been taught. We've also been under a lot of stress and pressure throughout the last couple of years. So learning in some respects has grown in some areas, but really dropped off on other areas. So we have to have a look at how can we start to get in and start to think about it from a perspective of learning and creating space to be able to learn. So when we're having a look, and there's been some recent reports that's actually come out when it comes to hybrid work. We've talked about this before in our previous sessions, and I'm just bringing it back in again because the reason I'm doing that, when we start to have a look at the hybrid work, and you think about it, we had a lot of young ones that were coming into the workplace, and their workplace was all purely virtual through the pandemic. So they didn't have some of the connections that you might ordinarily have when it came to learning. They were kind of doing it on their own and doing it just in time, and they were struggling. So what we're actually seeing in terms of some of the generational changes that are happening in this learning space, it states that 76% of employees say they'd actually stay longer if they could benefit more from learning and development support, because we're seeing a real drop off, and not necessarily always the business's fault. It's often the pressures that we tend to be under. When we're under pressure, it's very difficult to learn. So we've got to create the space. But you have a look at the two highest ones on here. So the two highest in here, when we look at it, is those younger generations and really needing. So if we want to retain our talent, we have to start thinking about the way that we can help and support them when it comes to their L&D needs. So an important one to have a think about when it comes to also and having confidence that employees are being productive. When we look at this, a lot of that can also be learning as well. Learning different skills. It could be cultural type sort of components. It's about good change. It's about providing space. It's about working out loud and teaching people how to work out loud when it comes to being productive and using tasks. And there's so many ways that you could go when it comes to this kind of functionality. But the more we're transparent, the less concern our senior leaders will actually have about whether you're productive or not. So learning is a core component. And when we look at that whole great disruption around hybrid work and having those workspaces and trying to come in, and I'm seeing more and more organizations do the whole, it's fine, you need to be in the office 2 days a week, 3 days at home, but you have to be in 2 days a week, of which one of those days has to be Thursday or a Wednesday, so we can bring our team together. And that's a day that we don't do meetings. It's a day for us to be able to be community minded and the hallway conversations. And so we're starting to see a real shift around that hybrid work. So therefore, when you've got a shift in the hybrid work and what it looks like, it also looks at then the shift around hybrid learning, where we're starting to look at that educational component where you might be spread across multiple locations. So when I start to build out a learning plan, there are things that I will look at. Now, some of the core components that I will actually look at from a learning perspective is, and you think about the learning framework, the 7-20-10 rule. Now, you may or may not be familiar with it. If you're across the change space, it's sort of something that we often will know. And, HR leaders are really starting to rethink, and you need to rethink some of that learning strategy to drive that organizational performance. Now, the numbers that were here, and as part of the original research, which was by Charles Jennings at the Tulsa Institute, so you can go and have a look at some of the papers online if you wanted to. And when they carried it out, so the Center for Creative Learning, it was done back in the 80s, for example, the numbers were kind of manufactured in some respects because the original study actually had 16 categories. So the main thing is when it comes to learning, we really need to start with the experience. What's the experience so that we can bring in what's that performance journey actually look like? So, and then add it then into the more formal work. So, the work to the formal. So when we come in here and we want to work to the formal, which is the 10% and getting up to the point where they're 10%. So the 10% is that formal learning structured framework where we're looking at hybrid, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. So that's the formal learning. And we do have a lot of that within the business, but it's not the only component, and it tends to get forgotten as part of that hybrid learning. Now, learning through exposure to others. Think about that young person that's just come into the job, and do they get to have exposure to others when you're online, apart from that team meeting, for example? So how do we create exposure to others when it comes to hybrid learning? And then there's that learning through experience. Now, it is the biggest one. We learn on the job, and that comes into the 70%. So the physical doing, and a lot of us work well in that physical turning, and that's where we start to get our main learning curve is in that physical do. When we're looking at effective methods of learning, and in some of the structures around this, so I need to clear out my ink, and of course it doesn't want to. No, not today. My eraser doesn't want to work for me today. All good. So the effective methods of learning. Now, this is a part of research that came out, quite some time ago, back in 2013, and it was around sort of SharePoint, and it was the end user study. Now, it has been there for a little bit, but the philosophies around this and the theory around this is still rings true. That co-worker is usually the best learning experience. So when I'm building out a learning program, there are things like, what is your buddy programs when it comes to learning? Now, we've got the hybrid learning, but then we've got all the other components that come into the plan. And on a buddy system, when it comes to co-working, you want to make sure that whoever is going to be buddied with as part of an orientation program, they actually understand the modern ways of working. An important component, okay? So we think about all the different ways. Now, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more over on the left side. Okay. We do have that sort of co-worker component there. That is things like even your change champs. So I will touch on that. And then there's the, self-study. Now, a lot of the self-study is the very popular way, especially through the pandemic. It's been very popular. Now, that whole trial and error, and it's through the pandemic, it's got very much focused on just in time learning. I need it now. Where is it really quick and easy? Having things with drop down lists in it has been too frustrating. They just let me scroll down a page. Okay, so having it all literally splayed out, here's your buttons and one big long list. We've seen a bit of a shift in the way people want to consume information as part of learning. Now, when I start to build out something like a learning plan, I really start with things like, well, what is the benefit of what they're going to be doing? Whatever it is that we're teaching on, for example, I always start with, what are the real benefits for doing? Because not everything that we turn on actually has a benefit. I always try and use, wherever I can, real work scenarios. So if there is a particular document the organization all have to get together on and regularly has to do, then that becomes a real work scenario as a potential, we got to collaborate and do this. on a document. So that's if you're doing document collaboration. There's so many real world scenarios that you could be working on. It's also important that as part of that learning plan, you have a look at things like the governance model and those security and governance, and have that included in, because people are guaranteed to ask the questions around that. But what do I do, or how do I when? So have that included in. I try and set up a learning center. And as part of that learning center, that's where they can actually go to do the asynchronous learning. And we'll dive into it. And I make sure I have my champs mobilized. So in a training methodology approach, I actually focus on the ADDIE. So ADDIE is the alignment and analysis, design, development, implement, and then coming in and evaluate. So the ADDIE. Okay, so ADDIE. So this is a fairly standard sort of learning approach that I go into as part of the training support. So these are all the core components. We're often seeing things like the learning needs analysis really dropping off. And that's usually because we're so time poor. I'm seeing organizations go, don't want to, they just get what they're given. Throwing pens around. They just get what they're given, okay? So we're not necessarily taking what do we need to do for who and why, and will a hybrid approach actually work? Who should be in, who should be out, and have a look at the various ways people actually learn. Even just asking them the question, how do you learn best? Where do you find, and you can have a tick box of different things in a survey, for example. You can just start from something really simple as a survey to find out the different ways that they might actually draw on information. And then that way you can design to it instead of wasting a ton of time. I see so many organizations spend an awful lot of money on e-learning. Now, it's become very popular through the pandemic to do e-learning, but it is lengthy and it is expensive. It does have its value. Where I see it under compulsory training, it really has its value. Under that compulsory you need to do. When it comes to you'd like to do, there are often, they're way too big, way too long, way too complex, and people then just go, click through it all kind of once if they can, and then, or they get someone else to give them the answer, or oh no, I see it all go a bit pear-shaped for the amount of money that's actually spent. So spend your money wisely on it and be really clear around why you're going to do it if you're going to start building out e-learning. Okay. So when I look at some of the key considerations around learning, when I'm going to put together a learning and training plan, I start to then take into consideration what are the tools that they're going to use, what kind of literacy do they need to have at the end of it? Are there any sort of current change programs? What is the change program that's going around this? Is there anything that's going to conflict with it, even, for example? And what's their training preference? So that's kind of comes in as part of the survey. And all of it could really be a survey if you wanted to start from there to get a bit of an idea. We'll often be workshopping as well and bringing core people across the business together, whether you're doing in a hybrid or you're doing it in person or it's just purely virtual. Try and make sure that you're on the right path, because training and learning consumes a lot of time, resources, and money. So be really clear around the path that you're going to take when it comes to hybrid, because it is a difficult thing to do, hybrid. Even for the best trainers in industry, hybrid is difficult when it comes to hybrid learning. So I start to go into a bit of a, training matrix. These are just overarching, really kind of just nice high level pictures, for example. I do that, tell me what it is, show me what I got to do, teach me, and then help me. So it comes under these kind of four different banners. And what am I going to create for the particular topics I'm going to be looking at as just a bit of a high level, so I kind of, drop in what I'm going to do for each one of them. And there might be way more than this. This is really just a very simple get you started kind of slide to help you out along the way. I might then start to dive in as part of the training matrix. What am I going to do? When am I going to do it? Who is my audience? Comments. And this is really high level. And in the schedule, I'd have exact dates and who's responsible and where is it going to go. And it goes, I've got a massive, huge spreadsheet of all the things as a run sheet of what I might do. And it's around about, when it comes to a program, it's around about 500 lines long when it comes to adoption and as a program. So this is just that, snapshot on a page, and then I have a run sheet, Excel spreadsheet of all the things that we've got to do to execute. So we've got things like our quick reference guides. What are we going to do? And make sure you've got a pilot group. Make sure you got time in terms of helping them to learn in that hybrid way. Now, this is just that high level of where I'd get started. But let's start diving now into the difference between hybrid and blended, because you've started to ask the questions around, synchronous, multiple, blended, learning platforms, learning and agnostic, or all sorts of things. Let's dive into what all that is and what it means when we're trying to help people learn. So tell me, if we understand, so we've talked about, what is hybrid and what is then blended learning. Both learning types involves a mix of in-person and online. They both do, okay? But the who differs across the two scenarios. So the blended learning, is not necessarily that what you've stated, Aaron, is, it's not that it's not right, but it just needs a bit of a shift, because hybrid learning is the in-person learners and the online, and they're different individuals. Okay, but with blended learning, it's the same individuals learning both in person and online. Okay, so there's the different kind of ways that we work. So the hybrid learning is online, but they're different. Okay. When I start to build out a program, I always ask the question, is this something that I need to excite them about something that's coming, or do I need to incite them to do something? Okay. A webinar is it's often one way, and I'm just exciting people, getting ready. This is really exciting. This is what we've got coming, and I'm exciting them, and I might even be teaching them in a webinar. However, it's still just an excite piece, because all they're doing is watching, they're not doing. So it's about making it known that the feature is there and how exciting is this feature. Now go away and do it yourself. But physically inciting someone to make a change is a little harder, and it can be difficult sometimes in some hybrid learning. So when I start to go into, I want to incite them to do something in particular, I've got to physically get them to click on something and give them a reason to click on something. Otherwise, it's going to be completely forgotten very quickly. So when I go into my hybrid learning side, it's usually I want to get into the physical click. I want them to do something because I want to incite them to learn. Okay? So that's the phase, that's the kind of the way that I go when it comes to learning. So there are different training modalities. There's lots of different things that you could actually do. I had things where there's been customer immersion experience rooms where they come and they physically come in and they walk around and they have a look at that new phone that's going to be on the desk, and they pick it up, and this is what the screens look like, and have a play on the surface and have a look at this and have a look at that and walk around. So that's an actual immersion experience. Now, that's difficult to do when you're when you're physically in some hybrid learning. However, I have built it in some e-learning where they've got the physical walkthrough. How you can do the physical walkthrough and you can click on things as you're going through, and this is what it looks like as an experience. You've got both ways to go. Road shows on the road, we're not seeing as much of that, but I am about to do one next year, so it's interesting to see it sort of slowly coming back in as that learning. The in-person, the virtual instructor. So you've got your instructor-led, but then you have your virtual instructor-led. So the two, and this is where we start to get in virtual instructor-led can then be hybrid. Okay, so flowing to the next piece. Our in-person seminars, our online webinars, our hybrid instructor-led off the back of the virtual. Then we have all our documentation we can create, our e-learning, our videos. We've even got our virtual reality. So you can have your headsets and you can be physically walking through, or you can have your learning through your virtual headsets and you're in the doing. You've got bots that can help you to be able to go through the learning, our on-the-job co-workers, and then we learn through other mediums such as our social media, for example. You might have learning hours, you might have a day where it's a My Growth Day. We even got things like hackathons as part of learning. There's lots of different ways, different naming. I have a Kirsty's Thirsty Thursdays for our Change Champs to do some learning, for example, in a virtual way, but it is actually hybrid because there are people that want to turn up. And there is a reason why people want to turn up. So in the learning modalities, can anyone tell me what is the difference? And I'm happy for you to put your hand up and come off mute. What is the difference between, when it comes to learning, a visual learner, an auditory learner, a kinesthetic, and a tactile? So what's the difference between them? Anyone want to come off mute? Anyone want to raise their hand and tell me what they believe is the difference between these types of learners? Anyone willing? Oh, I know I've got some specialists in the room that would know. Is it the style of learning? Yes, it is. It's the way an individual consumes the information, and it is a little bit around the style of learning, Lania. So a visual learner is someone that likes to read. They're going to read something. If it's a guide, they're going to like the guide, for example. It's the visual. An e-learning, person often can be visual, or you even might have it tied in with auditory. So auditory is then where they like to listen to podcasts type sort of learning, for example. So you've got the auditory. They'll just listen. When we're including the two, it might be you're watching, for example, the YouTube video on it. So you're doing very much a visual. If you're not physically watching it, for example, you might just be listening to it while you're doing something, then you focus more on the auditory. I like to read. So often I'll be tuned out to a video and I just want a transcript where I can read through and I'll pick things up very quickly through reading something. How do I do that? Give me something to read. So I am a very visual person. I like to physically see it, but I'm also personally a very tactile person. So I'd like to then physically click through it to learn. So it's about getting your hands in. So then a kinesthetic learner. Kinesthetic learner is someone that's actually an all of body experience. They'll be fully embedded in. A kinesthetic learner is the sort of a person where they will want to be physically in the room. They're very tactile, for example. They like to use all of the senses, the visual, the auditory, the tactile. They want to be embedded in the learning. They are the people that will just want to turn up in the room. They won't be online. They want to physically hear. It's like, cool, if you got something in person, I'm going to rock up in person. So understanding that kinesthetic learner is important, and you need to keep things moving all the time because the type of learner tends to shift in the way that they actually work. Because they're an all of body, they have a low tolerance for things going particularly slow. You've got to have a lot of things to keep them actually engaged. So there are different types of learners, and it's important to have learning components that are going to support each of these types of learners so that they can absorb the information in whichever way works for them. So that means having a lot of different ways for them to be able to connect with your content that you're trying to teach them when it comes to hybrid. Then you have to think about what are you going to do from a virtual standpoint and an in-person standpoint to engage the two. Now we've got things like synchronous and asynchronous learning. Can anyone tell me what the difference is? No one wanting to come into chat. Anyone want to tell me the difference between the synchronous and asynchronous learning? Anyone want to? Put it into chat. I'll give you a chance. Thanks, Craig. Synchronous and the asynchronous. Anyone thoughts? Okay. Yes. So asynchronous, same time, different places. Hybrid, same time, but we're in different places in learning. It requires those student and instructors to actually be around at the same time. So we have a ton of meetings where we're in synchronous situations when we're talking and working. Okay, so then the interaction is actually occurring in real time in a synchronous environment. We're doing video conferencing or online, or we're in person, or so that's our synchronous. And asynchronous means that it's actually occurring at a different time and a different place. So that way you're free to do it at your own pace, whatever that looks like. It's really about self-study, and you can read and watch and listen and do a little bit later on. So we look at things like Teams channel. When we're in a Teams meeting, we're doing synchronous. But if we're chatting out, working out loud in a Teams channel, typing, we're doing asynchronous communication. So differences between the two as an example. So if I start to now bring together the different types of learners, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile, and we look at the different synchronous and asynchronous learning, then we've actually got core components. So I talked about things like, having a guide and a tick list and having videos and emails that might go out, for example, and e-learning content, or maybe they're going to the web to read. Okay, so they're going, just give me, where's the blog? I want to just go read it. Whereas someone that would want to consume might go watch my YouTube video, or they want to see snip, they want to physically watch it. So there's that physical, then there's the auditory, which we talked about, the kinesthetic embedding, and then there's the tactile on the job learning. So when we bring all those components together, you then start to go, these are the ways that I need to tackle my audience, okay, and embedding in the different ways of learning. So then what's changed, and what are the components and what are the problems that we're having when it comes to successful hybrid training? What are the things that you actually need for some successful hybrid training? Anyone willing to list off a few things? What do you need to have successful hybrid training? Any thoughts? So if I was going to do some hybrid training, I'd need a room. What else? Internet connection, Jacob. Oh, yeah, very much so. I think we've all been, because seriously, we've all been learning online. We've spent how many years now doing online sort of learning and training and content and meetings? What are the things that we actually need to have a successful hybrid training scenario? Good equipment. Yes. Time of consuming it later. Very good. Thanks, Jacob. Okay. Do it in your own time. Anyone else? So to give you a bit of an idea, I've done a whole heap of hybrid training lately, both in person and online, and it is particularly difficult. One of the things that I'll actually state is when you send out that invite to someone that they're going to be involved in purely online training, for example, you're going to need to tell them that it's all purely online and the trainer's not in the room. Or if you're going to have a physical in person, and you send out an invite and it's got a Teams link in it, then I can guarantee you people will turn up online and not physically in the classroom. You have then instantly got a hybrid training situation. And I've had it many times. And we do often need to think about it because someone might be sick, they've got COVID, but they still want to join along. They're not feeling brilliant, but they still want to be there. So all of a sudden they're online. Next minute, you've got to cater to both the people in the room and online. So it comes with real challenges when you're catering to two components. If I was doing just training and it was in the room, I can physically walk around and see how they're going as part of learning. When I'm doing online, I have to think about how many people I can physically look after in a session. A good hybrid training online is 6 to 8 people, because you're going to do things like show me your screen, because they're going, I'm really struggling where I'm at. Okay, show us your screen. Let me show you where you need to click. Okay. So you've got to be able to swap out. Unlike a room where I can just walk around and have a look. Online, if you're online, I have to physically go one-to-one. So I'm going to each person to check in. I can't just look at the room and get the facial expression where they're going, oh, I'm really struggling with that. I don't know what this is. I can't find it. You can see it. In our virtual environment, in terms of running training, the difference is most people, due to neurodiversity or exhaustion, there's that whole cognitive load on the brain with having video on. If you've got a full day of virtual hybrid training, then it's a little exhausting. So therefore, they're going to turn their video off. So you haven't got those cues to work with. So now you've got to do all these little one-on-one kind of check-ins with everyone. So when I've got an in-person training, it's around about a 1 hour, and it's a 1 to 1.5 ratio. So if I'm going to do hybrid or online learning, like just purely, actually, let's just go to purely online. If I go to purely online, it's going to be a 1.5 hour to the 1 hour that might have been in person. So it can get up to 1.5 with 6 to 8 people online, all the one-on-one check-ins. Now, if I go to hybrid training where I've got people in the room and online that I've got to check in on, it can get nearly close to a 1:2 ratio of a, 1 hour might take 2 hours when you've got it across 2 locations. So you have to take that into consideration. It's going to take a little longer to get it done. So when I'm looking at the different ways in hybrid training, the things that I need to have in place to make that successful. Okay, so we talked about decent internet connection. We talked about, good equipment and some of the other components that you've got in there on the topic. So there are things like the room setup. Is it conducive? Because if I get up and I start moving around the room, I'm now gone from my camera. Now I've actually got audio on me, so I've got a microphone, so that's fine. You're going to hear me still. But if I didn't, and I've actually got a headset and it's on the computer, and I've got a room that I'm looking at with a headset on, it's not going to be a good look. Next minute, maybe you've got a speaker beside you, and you get up and you walk to the other end of the room, and then someone can't hear you. Okay. Where is your camera video actually focused on? Because if I step away, you can't see me if it's online. Everyone in the room can see me, but they can no longer. So where's the camera positioning? So the room becomes really important in terms of setting it up. If you're going to have over 8 people, then it's a good idea, when you've got the online and in person, is to have someone who's a moderator online to help and support if something is going wrong. Because if you are walking around a classroom, you're not physically seeing your PC. And if you are going to be walking around, you've got your mobile phone on you so you can keep an eye out on things, just tell people, I'm going to have my phone with me if you need to. And then that way the room doesn't feel like you're being rude because you're kind of walking around with a phone in your hand. So setting the expectations of the session become really important. You do need 2 screens, minimum. Okay, so you need a screen that you can actually see your presentation, and then you need a screen so you can see your people. The only other way you could do it is if you do PowerPoint Live, where it will load it physically into Teams so that you've got all your annotation tools and you can see your slides and you can see your notes, for example. That is one way to be able to do it. But not everything is about PowerPoint Live. You may need to demo something on your desktop. Then it becomes a little harder because then you're not going to be able to see your audience online when it comes to them asking questions, or if it's a Q&A, comments, who's raising their hand in the session, for example. So they're all components that you need to think about, is how many screens. I usually have a minimum of 3 screens when I'm running virtual learning. So when I'm in person, I do need at least 2 screens. So these are all the core components to be able to supporting. Setting those expectations, who is turning up, who is online, helping them, understanding you got the phones, all those sorts of things. Okay, sending out the right type of invite that says we will have it also in these rooms if you want to turn up, and be really clear and send out reminder. I have seen it where I've even had reminder emails go out and people still don't understand. So you have to be quite explicit and help people. We talked about the microphone, and then there's things like content access. Having that link and putting it into the Teams meeting and having it prepped and ready for both the people who are going to be in the class and those that are online, so you've all got access to the content that you need. Prepping them, you'll see at the start of my session, I've actually got there, where are you going to find it? What are we going to do? Do you have your microphone on or off? Can you raise your hands? Can you talk to me through the session? Do you keep your microphone off? Especially if it's online and you've got people in the classroom, things can get noisy. And maybe online can't see the people in the classroom if they raise their hand and they're talking online. So it's like, raise your hand, whether you're person or online, and give them really good expectations around some hybrid learning. So when I go in and I start to have a look at all of this, and I have people who rock up or don't rock up, and when you're online, it can be very easy for a trainer who's running a classroom to forget about the people online. And it's very hard online sometimes to maintain concentration. It's around about 5 minutes. You need to do something every 5 minutes to keep people online engaged. It's a little easier to keep people engaged when they're in the classroom. It'll be things like doing a whiteboard or sending links to those that are in the classroom so they complete stuff and they can do it on their devices, on their mobile phone, along with the people online, like whiteboarding, for example. So you're not physically writing on a whiteboard in the room of which no one can actually engage on. So what are the tools and the apps, that even the third-party apps you bring into play, whether it's, Kahoot questions or lots of different ways, Slido, or you've got all sorts of cool things you could bring into play to engage the whole audience, whether they're online or they're in person. So when I look at all that synchronous and asynchronous and the learning types, for example, if I have a look at the persona of the people and I go, I have a frontline worker, and this is one that was recent, and it was about patient care and capturing information, then it was, and we found that as a persona for that frontline worker, they were very in the tactile and kinesthetic. They like to do. That was one of their main learning modalities. Okay, they wanted it in a blended, so they wanted it so where it could be in person as well as blended going online and doing learning that was in the asynchronous. So they wanted both to be able to learn, because not everyone could turn up, so they had to have it in different ways. So that's when you kind of start to bring it all in. But the main focus was the things that were tactile, and we found that 90% of people would turn up to the in-hand, the in-person hands-on, compared to approximately we saw around about 18% of people engaging in the asynchronous learning. So really know your personas before you start to engage a whole audience. When we're looking at some of the synchronous and the asynchronous learning, the online and the webinars and the virtual compared to, and that hybrid learning compared to then flowing over into the asynchronous. This is one of my sort of teams examples for your champs, where I want them to be able to continue their learning long after I've done a session with them. I train them every Friday afternoon as champs, and then I expect them to go away and continue to do their learning. So I make sure that they've got a channel that has very specific information for them to be able to continue to do the learning. So where do you find all of the various components to be able to help you and support you when it comes to your learning journey for Microsoft 365? So let me give you some ideas of where you can find information. We should be able to get you out of here a little earlier. And I'm happy to have a chat and a conversation with you around some of this. So where do you find? Number one, Teams has training embedded in it, and it's just over in the help button in the bottom left. So where do you find different ways to draw on asynchronous, whether it's for your champs or whether it's for your organization, or there's so much really great content out there when it comes to learning. Okay, so get them in, teach them to fish, to find it. There is also the Adoption Hub app. So there's an actual bot that you can pin inside Teams to be able to help and support people with up to 100 plus common questions around Microsoft 365 Teams, around existing sort of FAQs. A good one to be able to drop in. So this is a learning bot. There's the Microsoft Learning Pathways. Now we're seeing some shifts when it comes to learning pathways, having it in Microsoft Content and Viva Learning. So I would focus more on Viva Learning than Learning Pathways now if I were a betting organization. There is the Microsoft Community Training. Now this is an Azure-based powered online learning platform. Now what it does is it actually allows you to take your learning offline for those that actually have to go out into the community where there's a really low bandwidth or they need to be able to work offline. So for example, I have a friend who's got a lot of workers and they go right out remote, like really remote. They need to go and fix that tower out in the middle of nowhere, and they've got no bandwidth whatsoever. But they still need to be able to continue to do learning while they're on the go, staying in extremely remote communities. So then this user platform is optimized for that. So there's videos and quizzes and lots of things that you can do on this Azure-powered learning platform to be able to take your learning offline. When they go back online, it synchronizes again. So it does a sync and it loads it all up to say that it's actually being completed. So that's one way to be able to help them do some asynchronous learning. Viva Learning having come into play. Now there's a lot happening across there. So you can actually load your SCORM compliant files. They need to be the 1.2 in terms of the SCORM compliant files. You've got SharePoint site, SharePoint Learning coming in. You can bring in your own documents. There's some really great core components that come into Viva Learning that you can embed inside Teams to be able to draw on. Now, across the Viva learning space and the blog that we were talking about, that's actually out when I was presenting on the What's New. Now, the future of employee learning infographic. When we have a look at this, 8 in 10 say they need additional skills to do their day-to-day work. So this means that, over 3/4 of your organization say they need some more skills. So we need to start taking these things into consideration and be serious about it. They say they'd stay at the company longer if they did. That, it's the best way to actually develop their skills, they think, is to leave the organization. Half people think they'd get better results if they go somewhere else. Okay. So you're going to start seeing that real churn of especially your young ones. When we looked at the hybrid work, you're going to start using all that great young talent that's coming into your business. And we're seeing that great, huge migration of people at the moment. I'm seeing it everywhere. There's such huge shifts in terms of people moving around. You want to retain them. Learning is one of the big core ways to be able to retain your staff. Okay. More often than not, we need to start thinking about modernizing our learning as a program. Okay, so if you start to think about ways to modernize and we look at different ways that we can actually do it, we need to take into account hybrid learning. So make sure you bring in a trainer that knows how to do decent hybrid learning. And not all trainers do. They expect to be virtual, and then they're ignoring people in the room, or they're ignoring people online and catering to people in the room, and test them out. And if it's about working on the go, make sure they know how to actually show and demo their mobile phone on the screen rather than just screenshots, for example. So you want to get into full embed learning as much as you can of what does it look like, and it's not just death by PowerPoint, a bit like what we're doing now, all right, in terms of some of the learning. However, you'll see that Microsoft's HR department actually saw a 58% increase in engaged learners in the company when they started to use Viva Learning, because it was throwing information up in a place where we go to do your work, which was inside Teams. So if you're already there, there's ways to be able to draw it forward. Now, there's some really great learning partners that have actually come into play when it comes to the content partners. Now, an LMS partner that has it's about to come on is Workday. So that's it's in private preview at the moment. So if you do have Workday, you can actually bring in, there are sort of APIs and other ways for you to bring in other learning providers. So you can start to drop this into the Viva Learning portal, because the Viva Learning portal brings in lots of awesome content from all over the place, including LinkedIn Learning. So if you do have subscriptions for your organization for something like LinkedIn Learning, it's very easy to drop it in. And you can build out different kind of learning plans as an individual and say to a manager, and a manager needs to give them time to be able to learn if it's asynchronous, for example. They also need to give them time to learn, and a longer time to learn if it's hybrid. Because if you've got less people in the room and it's going to take longer because it's hybrid, then they need to be given that opportunity to be able to spend more time learning compared to what we used to do in the past. So we have some unrealistic expectations around the synchronous learning now compared to the asynchronous learning. So they want them to just go do the asynchronous learning, but it's not always necessarily the best way to learn. We see some better skill sets coming out of the physical click, where they can ask the question then and there in real time and say, but how do I? As long as it's built into a good scenario and it's not just, this is it and features based. They've got to know why. So your LinkedIn Learning then in the asynchronous may not necessarily give you that, but it will build some skill sets. So we need to give people time to do it. Microsoft have got a ton of 365 training online. You can have this, it all embeds into Viva Learning as well. Or I don't recommend building a ton of guides, because frankly, Microsoft can barely keep up with their own content. When you look through, it moves so fast. So just use the links. If you've got FAQs, just do a link to the Microsoft content rather than trying to build it all out under your own FAQs. Keep it to be very organizational specific in your FAQs or your learning content, where it's very specific type screenshots, because you've really changed the environment and it's not stock standard like it might be in Microsoft if you haven't got kind of out of the box. But I don't recommend it because it moves so fast. It'll be pretty much out of date past the date that you roll it out, within a month anyway. Do your Champ management platform. So the Champ management platform, it does have its latest, this has great upgrades and a few other things coming. for the Champs platform, it is work. It's work for both the person that's rolling it out and it's work for your Champs, because there's a lot that goes into it in terms of managing it and doing tournaments and what learning do you need them to do. And it could be, I need you to come to this synchronous training and you get points for it. So kind of driving learning for your Champs. Or this is the learning I need you to do online for the asynchronous, so you can start to bring it both together to lift skill sets. If you build a good Champs program, it's going to make it much easier when it comes to a little bit later on and helping a business learn. Your Champs are very important. We've talked previously about the Champs calls. Microsoft have a ton of really great demos that are actually built on Azure. There was a recent upgrade to it. I plug this in as a tab inside Teams. This is basically e-learning that's created by Microsoft for your organization, so you can physically do some click-throughs of content. So it's already pre-built. Azure demos, click, 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 if you want them to do it. So have a look at those. They're of real value. There's great podcasts and shows. There's Microsoft Learn to be able to build some skills. Now, some of the stuff that's actually in Microsoft Learn, there's some pretty cool content in the Learn by Doing. So this is physically, doing. So if you want to do the tactile type stuff and personalized online hands-on training, there's all sorts of content in here. Go and have a look at the virtual days. I would recommend it. I'm currently in the Microsoft Reactor. The Microsoft Reactor have virtual sessions, like purely virtual, that they run all the time on so much content. It does tend to focus on sort of a lot more on the technical, but there are the people skills side of things as well. And I've run sessions for them and they're on my YouTube. Okay. Now, there's also the Cloud Skills Training Catalog. And if you haven't actually seen it, you can go in and you can filter it. So I've actually just come in and I filtered it by Microsoft 365. So you can see in here one that's an on-demand webinar that's free and it's coming up and you can actually register, for example. Inclusive Meetings 101, Power BI if you want to get yourself up and running. So all of these free ways to be able to learn to build skill sets. There's heaps of content. Now, the Learning Connect collection site, there hasn't really been any content, as there's not much content in terms of 2022. It's been more focused on from 2021, but there is a little bit in there and past information to be able to help and support you. You can also bring in, there's lots of other third-party learning type tools, like, Nulia, for example, you could go in and have a look at. It embeds physically inside, it tracks, managers can actually come in and tell you this is what they want, a learning plan, where you're at. It's got some really great feedback. It's all gamification when it comes to learning. And there is a lot of other products. This was just sort of one of them as a feature. I do talk about hybrid working along with the Axiom team, and we kind of go through all sorts of things around hybrid working to be able to support you. There are really great white papers. There's so much information online that you could go and have a look around learning in the workplace and what does it look like to do some virtual learning. So hopefully that has given you a bit of an example of hybrid learning and getting to know it. So our hybrid learning compared to blended learning, hybrid, different places, same time. Okay? That's the difference between the two. Hopefully you've enjoyed the chat and the conversation. Please feel free, ask me any questions. If you want to come off mute, I can finalize and then I'll hang around. You can ask me as many questions as you like. Tomorrow is the Yammer Festival, guys. So if you haven't actually registered, I'd highly recommend. It's held by Microsoft and Swoop. It has some great speakers coming in tomorrow morning. It's Australian time, sort of tomorrow morning. Go and have a look, go register. So that is coming up tomorrow. There are others around the world. The conference in European conference is just finished, but there are others around the world should you wish to go to or see the virtual content that comes out. We've got all our great where to our find. So this is all in the presentation for you to be able to go and have a look. Our past content to be able to support you. And then we won't be back until, try that again, the 7th of February, I should say. 7th of February, 2023. So we've got a couple of months till we're back. I'll have a bit of downtime. Any thoughts, questions, comments? Otherwise, we'll do a bit of happy holidays and happy new year, and how exciting. Anyone got any questions on the learning content you want to ask me about? So I have been a trainer. I was trainer at Australia's largest training company. I was the product manager. I used to do, and I do a lot of train the trainer for the industry. I help people set up. I've built a lot of virtual online training programs for training organizations and helping and supporting them on, what does it look like to do it successfully. And I build out quite large programs around training and learning as a core specialist in this space. So happy to answer any questions that you have. And feel free, I'll come back just in case anyone's raising their hand. Anyone have any questions at all? If not, I will let you go for the session. I'll stop recording now. If you do wish to continue on and have a chat with me after I've stopped recording, please feel free to do that now. Any comments, thoughts, questions? Just stop recording right now. Hang on a second. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Kirsty.